But Jacory Croskey-Merritt is one that keeps standing out to me because Washington was so efficient running the ball last year, 4th in the NFL in rushing yards. Dan Quinn is talking about his explosive, violent cuts and how he's just impressing everybody there. The beat reporters think that he could have a role. Washington's really chasing for big, explosive run plays. For me, it's Jacory Croskey-Merritt.
Croskey-Merritt is someone I have been taking. He's been my primary round 5 target in Dynasty rookie drafts. The path for Croskey-Merritt to get on the field this season is not as hard as you might imagine. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.
Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Greminger, and today I'm joined by one of the sharpest guys in the fantasy football industry, and that's Jared Smola of Draft Sharks. Jared was on School of Scott like a month and a half ago, but I had technical difficulties, so it was just Scott Barrett and Jared. I said, Jared, we got to get you back on. Gracious with your time. This time we're doing it with a Dynasty lens, and that's something where I think you're sort of synonymous with redraft content, but you put out a ton of Dynasty content as well, Jared. Especially around NFL draft season. I mean, we've talked about rookies and all that. Repeat guest here on Dynasty Life. So really excited. Plenty of time to talk about your work a little later on the show, but I got to ask you, this week it dropped. There's a number of beat reporters, some talking heads saying Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze is the number 1 target on Chicago. He is going to get the alpha usage. Rome Odunze is emerging, and this is the guy you want. Is that something you agree with? Do you think this is a little bit of noise, or do you think Rome Odunze does take that huge second-year leap after a very disappointing rookie season?
Yeah, I headed into this summer training camp season being open to anything in Chicago. There are so many moving pieces there. Obviously new coaching staff, new weapons, young weapons like Rome Odunze. So I'm kind of open. I'm an open book when it comes to the Bears. I was not so big on Odunze for much of the offseason. Like you said, Theo, there really was not much, maybe nothing to like about what he did as a rookie. I mean, he ran the 7th most pass routes among all wide receivers, so playing time was not a problem, but Rome Odunze finished 48th among receivers in PPR points. And he was outside the top 50 wide receivers in targets per route, yards per route, PFF receiving grade. But it's tough to separate the player from the situation. The Bears were a mess last year. The coaching was awful. The quarterback struggled. The offensive line was a mess. So the other thing about Odunze last year, he didn't get many easy looks. He had a 14.2 yard average target depth. 24% of his targets came 20 plus yards downfield. It was all these, low percentage plays. So, and that's an area where Caleb Williams struggled last year as well. So I'm just curious to see, and how Ben Johnson has talked about Odunze so far is as that typical X receiver outside, maybe continuing to get more of those, high difficult targets. So I'm curious to see if he gets more of the easy button stuff. I think that would help. But I'm definitely open to the possibility of Odunze being the Bears' number 1 target this season.
Yeah, and I know from a redraft lens, it's like a palatable ADP where you've been able to get him in the 6th round. It was the 7th round for a while. Now it's sort of corrected itself into the 6th round, and occasionally early 7th still exists. So that's been fine. I think in Dynasty, it's a bigger question mark because people are doing Dynasty startups. The Dynasty trade market for Odunze is obviously high. Do you think a lot of how Odunze does is tethered to Luther Burden's emergence? Can they coexist here, or would Burden taking on a larger than anticipated role just be completely detrimental for Odunze and potentially DJ Moore?
I think Burden and Odunze can coexist. I think where it gets trickier is when you factor in that Colston Loveland arrived as well, right? Like Ben Johnson comes in, spends his first 2 draft picks on pass catchers on a team that you looked at the roster before the draft. They didn't need pass catchers. They had DJ Moore, they had Rome Odunze, they had Cole Kmet. The pass catching core is okay, but Ben Johnson comes in and takes these 2 guys that he's obviously high on. So that's the tricky part with Odunze long term. And I think Johnson seems open to the possibility of Odunze still being his top target from all the stuff we've heard over the past week or so now. So it's tricky. I think Odunze is getting the benefit of the doubt for the most part in the Dynasty market as far as his price tag goes. So he definitely hasn't been someone I was buying this offseason, he's also not someone I'd be, looking to sell at this point. I do think there's still plenty of upside to him.
Yeah, I sold an Odunze share in a big FFPC league last year, chasing the money, and I flipped him for Jonathan Taylor. It was an FFPC Triflex league, so it was like wide receiver heavy. That ended up working really well, won the league. I think it's still going to remain a win. But if Odunze takes that huge step forward, I do think that there's going to be big winners in this Ben Johnson offense. It's just there's multiple ways this thing could go. Let's expand on Colston Loveland. Loveland's continually getting praised by Ben Johnson. Talks about like just all kinds of positive vibes when it comes to Loveland. Just curious, like, where does he stand for you as a prospect in Dynasty? Do you view Loveland as a truly elite asset, or do you think that he's going to settle in and become just a really good football player? Somebody who could be like a tight end 6, 7, 8 type, or do you think he has the potential to be top 3 Dynasty tight end?
I think he's closer to that elite group than the top 6, 7 range you're talking about, Theo. Getting up to the Bowers McBride tier is going to be very tough, but I see no reason why we shouldn't be even already viewing Loveland in that like next Sam Laporta type tier. I think he can have similar production, obviously, with the same coach as Laporta had when he broke out as rookie. I have reservations about Loveland as a redraft target. Depending on ADP, I see him like tight end 12 on some sites, but he's like tight end 16 on other sites. If he's more in that tight end 16 range for redraft, I'm okay with him. Dynasty, though, I'm definitely all in. You talk about the draft capital from this team that brought in a brand new coaching staff. Ben Johnson obviously loves this guy. And just the level of prospect Colston Loveland was. I mean, Tyler Warren put up this massive, season last year in terms of raw stats. Colston Loveland had a higher dominator rating last year than Tyler Warren did. It wasn't the raw production because that Michigan team didn't throw it as much as Penn State did. So I think Loveland's an awesome prospect. I was glad to see the NFL agreed that he's, right there with Tyler Warren with the draft capital he got. So he's definitely someone I'm big time in on for Dynasty.
Yeah, I think for me, he's tight end 4 in Dynasty. The Bowers McBride are in their own little tier. Laporta's sort of a player that's finished as the tight end 1 overall. So we've actually seen it happen. We know he's really, really good. And then afterwards, I think I'm still like pushing Loveland right up there because, you talked about it. And I'm glad you brought up like sort of the dominator rating. Michigan was just so putrid, but Loveland led them in targets, catches, touchdown catches, receiving yards, you name it. And the year before on the national championship team, he nearly led them in catches. He was edged by Roman Wilson, who was the 3rd round pick of Pittsburgh a year ago, like only by a few receptions. So Loveland was just a faster learner at Michigan. And obviously the testing numbers, the size, everything's sort of ideal. And now he's attached to a offensive coordinator / head coach that oversaw a tight end 1 overall season from Sam Laporta. So complete wheels up. We talked about a wide receiver who was disappointing as a rookie. Keon Coleman over in sort of your neck of the woods, Buffalo Bills player, was early 2nd round pick. So obviously didn't have the same draft capital as Odunze, but Keon Coleman was drafted ahead of guys like Ladd McConkey. So there was some real like chips pushed in by Buffalo right there when it came to Keon Coleman. Last year, flashed at times. Some of the analytics people like yourself will point to some metrics that are supportive of Keon Coleman. And then there's others who will say, we don't like the way Buffalo's used him. There's been a lot of sort of positivity early on in training camp when it comes to Coleman. Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated just wrote about Keon Coleman as a player that the Bills think can take a big step forward, help them this year. Said the hope is that he becomes a Marcus Colston type player. Really interesting. We talked about that a little bit in the pre-show. Sort of what are your vibes with Keon Coleman? Because he's a guy that has fallen behind a lot of rookie wide receivers this year, sort of an afterthought in dynasty startups. You get him in like the wide receiver 50 range. So you're not even having to use a wide receiver 4 price tag necessarily on him in like an FFPC startup. Where are you at on Coleman? Do you think that this is a player that the dynasty marketplace is like being too difficult on for a lack of production last year? Or do you think that this is a player that there's some red flags there that are going to prevent him from taking a big step forward?
No, I'm in on Coleman, redraft and dynasty. Probably more redraft, honestly. I'm surprised he's so cheap in redraft, and I think he's even underpriced in dynasty. I mean, we are talking about a 22-year-old. He entered the league as a young rookie. He was, as you said, Theo, the 33rd overall pick of last year's draft, just heading into year 2 on a strong offense. Like that alone, I think makes him intriguing. And I'll give you some of those, metrics that do point to Coleman's rookie season being better than I think it was in terms of like just straight production or like fantasy value. I know he was not someone we could ever really count on in fantasy lineups last year, but he did average 1.71 yards per route. That was 4th best among 11 qualifying rookies. It was actually just ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr. It was ahead of Xavier Worthy, ahead of Odunze. Coleman averaged 19.2 yards per catch, 15.5 yard average target depth. He obviously did a lot of that downfield stuff. But in addition, 7.7 yards after the catch per reception, 5th best among 84 qualifying wide receivers. And he led all players in NFL Next Gen stats yards after catch per reception over expected. So he gained a lot more yards than expected based on, where that catch came on the field, where the defenders were around him. He was adding a lot of value after the catch, which honestly surprised me because that's not the type of player he was coming into the league. Also had the 13.8% touchdown rate. I think he's going to continue to be a big factor for the Bills when they get near the end zone. Just the archetype of player Coleman is. He's a big body, good uncontested catches. And even last year, man, his 2 games before that wrist injury, 4 catches, 125 yards, 5 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown. Then he gets hurt. He's just not the same player the rest of the year. So I even think he might have been, starting to break out last year before that wrist injury.
Yeah, I'm with you. And he was a young player last year. Again, the draft capital was strong. And you mentioned the red zone. I think that's the narrative for Coleman, where like it's difficult for us to predict the touchdown scorers. But if you're looking at Buffalo's wide receiver room, that's certainly not like Khalil Shakir. Dalton Kincaid's been underwhelming, also dealing with a injury right now. A lot of new pieces there that like Josh Palmer, Elijah Moore, guys like that. But when it comes down to it, like
Right.
Coleman, this guy was an alpha. There's a reason why Buffalo was excited to draft him. And anybody who's like kind of forgetting like that, you just have to go back to the LSU game and just pop the tape in. It was sort of like the Keon Coleman coming out party in that game. I had 3 touchdown catches against LSU, opening game of the year for Florida State. Florida State had that unbelievable season. Obviously, it was disappointing at the end for them. They had like national title hopes, but and then got completely manhandled by Georgia in that bowl game. But like Coleman's a player that I think there's still like potential range of outcomes here that could be really beneficial to buying low in Dynasty. Jared, you guys drop like some appointment read articles. You got you're best known. I always give you props for this one. You called the Cooper Kupp season back in 2021. You didn't quite tell us, like you told everyone draft Cooper Kupp, draft Cooper Kupp, draft Cooper Kupp. He went on to have one of the best wide receiver seasons of all time. That was a huge win for you and a huge win for Draft Sharks. You do your comeback player of the year, your breakout player of the year, and a few other articles like that in the month of August. What is dropped? What is coming up?
Yeah, and our breakout pick last year was Jaden Daniels. That worked out.
Not a bad
well
one.
Too,
Not a bad one.
Yeah, our comeback player dropped today. Actually, that's up on the website. It is for Draft Sharks insiders only. You got to be a member to access it. But that's up. We'll have our bust pick up next week, and then breakout will be coming 2 weeks from today.
Yeah, no, big shout out. I always look forward to your breakout pick. Love the Jaden Daniels call last year, but yeah, like Cooper Kupp one. Like we're waiting for that one again. Jaden Daniels, you get a lot of props for that one. Jaden Daniels is a huge call. I know you and Scott Barrett agree on a lot of stuff. So I'm very interested to see who your breakout pick is. I found out who their comeback player of the year. We're not going to reveal that. You got to go pay for it, but it's a really, really fun one. And I was excited to hear this one. So go and read that and get a chance to check out all of Jared's podcasts, all the shows. I've had a chance to go over and record with you guys. You guys are doing quality work all the time over at Draft Sharks. Let's keep this going. We talked about Colston Loveland and the effect that he can have on the Ben Johnson offense. You got Tyler Warren, drafted a few picks behind Loveland, unbelievable numbers out of Penn State. There was an assumption earlier in the offseason by many that Daniel Jones was going to take over as the starting quarterback in Indianapolis. There was a lot of enthusiasm by early drafters for players like Josh Downs. Michael Pittman still has a big hive where people are pointing out that he played injured last year, potentially a bounce back year for him. And then there's Tyler Warren, who we really have no idea what the role is going to be. We hear these beat reporters saying it's going to be a big one, but this has been a franchise that has completely neglected the tight end position for so many years. last year there was almost no tight end, production whatsoever. You have to go back to guys like Jack Doyle to even find guys that were even top 15 type players in tight end production. Eric Ebron, go way back pre 2020 to find these sort of players. I don't know how this is going to work out, but I do think there's a scenario that Tyler Warren being there is going to be really, really good for potentially Anthony Richardson as the starting quarterback. Richardson's dirt cheap right now in all formats, including Dynasty. You're getting, if he was a stock, no quarterback would have lost more value from this time last year when he was the QB5 in redraft to today when he's the QB29 in redraft. It feels like things are turning here where Richardson's going to be the starting quarterback and it's going to be Tyler Warren at least being featured a lot. Are you buying into this narrative? Is Anthony Richardson a potential buy low? And just how high can Tyler Warren run in a Richardson-led offense?
Yeah, a lot to tackle here. I'll start with the Colts tight end history thing. I'm not worried about that. And even the last 2 years of like no production from Colts tight ends have come with current head coach Shane Steichen. I just think that's because they had no good tight ends on the roster, right? If you look at Steichen's history from before Indianapolis, he had Hunter Henry have some nice seasons with the Chargers, and then with the Eagles, Dallas Goedert, Zach Ertz. There were even a couple seasons where Goedert and Ertz were like both top 15 tight ends. So Steichen has a nice tight end history. I think the draft capital they invested in Warren tells us that Steichen wants to make Warren a focal point of this offense. So I'm not concerned about that at all. I am concerned about Anthony Richardson potentially being this team's quarterback. These aren't Tyler Warren stats, but just to give you an idea of it, like what Richardson did to this Colts offense last year. In 10 full games with Richardson last year, the Colts ran 58 plays per game and passed it on 47% of their snaps. In their other 7 games, 65.6 plays per game. So what's that, like 7.5 more plays per game and a 59% pass rate. I just think Richardson even if he's improved, he just hurts all the skill position guys. It's just going to be fewer plays, fewer passes. Like we'll see how improved he is. I don't know. All the stuff we're hearing out of camp is positive on Richardson. I want to see it with my own eyes. Like I hope he gets some serious run in the preseason and we get to look at this and see if he actually is improved as a passer. But I'd be worried for Tyler Warren. And even I don't think Richardson is their long-term answer. If he was though, I still think that'd be bad news for Warren. I think if you're a Warren dynasty owner, you want a more traditional pocket passer. We don't need Tom Brady back there, but we need someone who's a bit more traditional than Richardson for Warren to really hit a ceiling, I think.
Yeah, specifically with Richardson, he's the interesting one here. I agree with you. And Tyler Warren, I think long-term, it's a longer-term bet usually when it comes to tight ends. We've sort of been spoiled the last 2 seasons. But a player this productive with this level of draft capital, like heading into 2026, I believe Tyler Warren will be viewed as like the number 1 or number 2 target on the Colts. I think that's a reasonable bet to make. And I think there's a potential that he could lead them in targets this year. But with Richardson, if Richardson starts, Richardson is going to find his way in fantasy lineups. This is a player that is 6th all time in the NFL in rushing yards per game. Incredibly inefficient as a passer, was sub 50% passer last year, but the players around him are good. And he was only 22 last year. So I do think that that's sort of like pushed to the side where people have written the script about Richardson. I think he can get a little bit better. And I do think that Warren could end up being his preferred target. Is this just a nightmare scenario for the Josh Downs fantasy manager with the threat of Tyler Warren as like an easy button target and also Richardson, of course, being again, low volume in terms of plays run, also a low completion percentage type quarterback. Even if he improves 10% as a passer, you're still talking about sub 60%.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like I'm open to Richardson improving as a passer. He needs to improve a ton as a passer for him to like not be bad news for these pass catchers on the Colts. I have a stat somewhere. I think it's like there were like 3 quarterbacks since 2000 that have attempted like 300 plus passes in a season and had a sub 50% completion rate. It's Anthony Richardson, Tim Tebow, and Achilles Smith. Those are the names that Richardson is with in terms of how inefficient he was as a passer last year. So I have the Downs last year with Richardson, wide receiver 46 in points per game. In the Joe Flacco games, wide receiver 17 in fantasy points per game. So that's, the gap between the gap in production of these guys. And Michael Pittman was the same way. Even Jonathan Taylor, much more productive in Flacco games than Richardson games. That's just what I'm saying. Like, from the Richardson perspective, it's super exciting if he can hit and be a good enough passer to be a starter for the next 5-6 years because of the rushing ability. But I'm just, I'm convinced that if Richardson's under center, it's bad news for all the Colts skill position guys.
Yeah, you've talked about the splits with Jonathan Taylor versus Anthony Richardson, and I think people would have the assumption would have been, and at least when he was drafted, it's going to be this unbelievable rushing upside for Taylor because he's next to this mobile quarterback. It's sort of been anything but that. He's been okay with Richardson, but the splits have been much better without. So definitely a lot of moving parts here. I think from a dynasty lens, potentially buying low on Richardson is not the worst idea because of the utility. Just treat him like he was an older quarterback. You're not getting somebody who's going to be a 5-year answer for you, but you might be able to get a player that is, again, in redraft price of QB 29. I think if he starts this year, he's going to put up top 16 numbers just based on the rushing upside alone and the fact that there's good players on this offense and they're going to be competitive. And offensive line also is a plus in Indianapolis. Despite some turnover, they're still looked at as a better than average offensive line. So it's a lot of moving parts here. Tyler Warren, if you have him, just relax, but know that the usage might be really good, but the production might not be great if it's Richardson behind center. Let's keep this conversation going. An interesting player that is getting a lot of buzz early in camp is a little bit unexpected is Tank Bigsby. And also another player is Braelon Allen. So in Bigsby, we have a third-year running back who flashed a little bit last year in year 2, averaged about 4.5 yards per carry, while Travis Etienne was averaging sub 4 yards per carry for the second consecutive season. Braelon Allen was a 20-year-old rookie who started off like unbelievable and then trailed off as the season went along, only 21 years old. I'm sort of in on Allen, and I know you've said some positive things about Bigsby. Your thoughts on these two players heading into the 2025 season?
Yeah, I am definitely in on Bigsby. I've kind of been in on him all offseason. I mean, when they took Breece too, and that made me back off a bit just because we have a brand new coaching staff, brand new GM there, and they spend this early day 3 pick on a running back. And that Tootin might still be the guy you want in Jacksonville. Like, from a dynasty perspective, I'm definitely still in on Tootin. But Bigsby, after a horrible rookie season, was actually really efficient as a runner last year. 4.6 yards per carry. He was top 9 among 47 qualifying running backs in yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles forced per attempt, and rush yards over expected per attempt. He easily beat Travis Etienne in all 3 of those metrics. My concern with Bigsby is just, what's the upside in the passing game? He has 8 catches through 2 seasons or whatever.
Catch passes. And I think that
and
I'll bring that.
He did in college.
Yeah, no, I was going to bring up the exact same thing. Like, when people talked about him coming out of Auburn, it was this big back who was well-rounded. And I think that's one of the reasons that he was a 3rd-round pick. And Bigsby had a ton of buzz heading into his rookie season, despite not having that production. Like, Bigsby was the one where, like, people were posting videos of him on X and just talking about how he could be a real thorn in Etienne's side. Of course, Etienne had a decent season, a strong season, and then Bigsby was sort of left completely alone there. And then last year, sort of unexpectedly, Bigsby bounced back. So I think that the pass catching argument, they didn't use him as a pass catcher, but last year was sort of his de facto rookie year because he wasn't on the field at all as a true rookie. So I think he can be an opportunistic pass catcher.
I think so. I will say that there's some bad tape of him in the NFL trying to catch passes so far. And it's he's only gotten like 16 targets or whatever, so small sample. So, but I'm generally with you, Theo. I think new coaching staff might see him as not someone who they're gonna feature in the passing game, but someone who, when he's on the field, he's at least a check down option. So I'm definitely interested in Bigsby. Redraft for sure. Again, dynasty, I still kind of lean towards Tootin. He was a very exciting prospect, and the fact that they took him so early. We heard James Gladstone say, like, even in his interview with the Jags when he was trying to get the GM job, they asked him to like pick out one player that you kind of would target in this draft, and Tootin was his player. So yeah, that's all kind of exciting for Tootin longer term.
Yeah, it definitely interesting. And I think if you're holding Tank Bigsby bags in Dynasty right now, it's not time to sell on the news because there's a chance you get a much better window of opportunity if he does lead this backfield during the first month of the season. Tootin, I still think, is the one you want because, like, you brought up the pass catching ability of Bigsby. We know the limitations of Etienne as a runner. Tootin's the one who can sort of do both things. And again, super, super athletic. How about Braelon Allen? Your thoughts on Allen? We're going to talk about Breece Hall a little later on the show, but let's say that Braelon Allen is in the David Montgomery role in the Tanner Engstred office, and Breece Hall is in somewhat of the Jahmyr Gibbs role. Just how effective can Braelon Allen be in a Montgomery-esque role?
You know, I liked Braelon Allen coming into the league. I think you look at what he did as a rookie, it was pretty underwhelming overall. He did get off to a strong start, but he really tailed off for the final like 2/3 of the season, and his like final efficiency metrics and advanced metrics were actually pretty underwhelming. But like you said, Theo, he was super young, so definitely capable of taking a big step forward. You know, the one issue I have with the whole Montgomery Gibbs thing is that, you know, that Lions offense had Jared Goff at quarterback. This Jets offense has Justin Fields at quarterback, who's going to take a lot of those carries and a lot of those goal line attempts as well. So, and I know people aren't expecting Hall and Montgomery to be as overall productive as those Lions running backs were, but I do think Fields I'd be surprised if there were two fantasy relevant Jets running backs in addition to Justin Fields, just because how much Fields is going to do on the ground. So to me, I'm still viewing Allen as a nice handcuff behind Breece Hall, but I don't quite view him as someone who's going to have standalone 2025 fantasy value.
Yeah, I think I'm a little bit more bullish on Allen than you are. I've been trying to draft him a lot in best ball, and I've started to mix in some redraft shares. I just get the vibes from Aaron Glenn, and we talk about like the skill position talent in New York. Obviously, you bring up the Justin Fields, sort of the limitations to open up a lot of pass catchers, but I think the way that you can kind of overcompensate that is utilizing multiple backs, and Hall's going to have to catch some passes. Again, we'll get your takes on Breece Hall a little later, but I think that just based on the overall quality of the offense, using Braelon Allen as somewhat of a hammer, if you want to go back to the A.J. Dillon plus role in Green Bay, I think that's sort of an outcome that could be there with Breece Hall in like the Aaron Jones role. But Allen, I think a lot of the takes on Allen last year, he was only 20 years old, and I think he's an opportunity to really improve. He's a really plus athlete. They talked about how he's 240, and I remember the quote that always kind of stuck with me is Robert Saleh was like, you know, this Braelon Allen's 240. It would be good if we get him to cut down a little bit, get him down to like 230, lose some weight here. And the strength and conditioning team said it's actually impossible for him to lose weight because his body fat percentage is like one of the lowest on the entire Jets roster. Guy's like a bodybuilder. So it's like Braelon Allen. I made this comment with Scott on School of Scott last year, where I always worry that a new coach is going to look at Braelon Allen and say, that's a football player. I'm going to get him a role. And I kind of get that vibe with Aaron Glenn. And I think that the youth that he has is a little bit of a positive. It's sort of like this ball of clay that you can mold into your own. So I think I'm a little bit more in on Braelon Allen. I agree with a lot of your takes on Bigsby and Tootin. We talked a little bit about this in the pre-show as well. There's just so many running backs in this 2025 draft class. We're starting to see the quality of the class based on all of the rookie running backs who are at least in contention to be a handcuff. So certainly we've got guys at the top like Ashton Genty, Omarion Hampton. We don't even need to talk about them. But we do have Woody Marks, who now has a clear opportunity in Houston. I think the two of us have sort of been in line on what are we doing here? We're going to get excited about Nick Chubb. I think Woody Marks is the interesting one in Houston. Jacory Croskey-Merritt has a huge buzz in Washington. It feels like Alfred Morris 2.0, just based on the off-field buzz for this sort of late drafted player on the Washington franchise. You got a ton of guys. You got DJ Giddens recently in the news. Brashard Smith has been a player a lot of people are drafting the hell out of. Jarquez Hunter getting some praise from Sean McVay. Is there a player or two that stand out to you in this among the day 3 picks that you think could be fantasy relevant this year? And if there is one, who could be this year's Bucky Irving, a player that gets drafted on day 3, gets the opportunity and completely runs with it?
I mean, I think Bashal Tootin is just too easy to be this year's.
Right, so let's take Cam
Scatteraboo
and Bashal Tootin out of the equation. They're basically third rounders.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to mention him quick because I do think it's too obvious with the Liam Cohen connection. But you mentioned Jarquez Hunter. I like him a lot. I liked him as a prospect. Really strong 2024 season, 1,200 rushing yards, 6.4 yards per carry. He was second among 31 running backs at the combine in rush yards over expected per attempt last year. He was also fourth among those 31 in elusive rating and third in breakaway rate. He's 204 pounds, ran the 4.44 40 at the combine, 80th percentile speed score. It's a really nice looking prospect, lands in a great situation, right? With the Rams, where like whoever's getting the ball for the Rams under Sean McVay has put up big fantasy numbers. I don't think Hunter's going to threaten Kyren Williams' role as lead back this season, but thinking longer term, I mean, Kyren Williams is unsigned. It doesn't seem like the Rams are too interested in signing him to this like, mega long-term deal. So I think this year Hunter is a nice handcuff behind Kyren Williams. And I think there's a chance in 2026 that he's their lead guy.
Yeah, I've made this take on a couple other shows that I think if you are going to get a Bucky Irving like impact, I think Jarquez Hunter is the best bet because again, the quality of the Rams offense, I think it would take a Kyren Williams injury. But also Jared, I'll just bring it up. Like we sort of were making this argument against Kyren Williams in 2023, saying that the guy could not sustain this level of volume for consecutive seasons. And he had like 260 touches. Last year, he was up to like 350 touches. And when we're talking about Kyren Williams, we're talking about someone who's definitely sub 200 pounds. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing sub 190 at times during the season. Like he's a smaller back. To his credit, he's been able to handle a ton of volume, but that sort of thing can catch up to you. If Jarquez Hunter gets on the field for this LA offense, I think he could be really, really good. Like a guy we're ranking as a weekly RB1 that week, that kind of level. Mm-hmm. I will bring up, like, I've talked a lot about Brashard Smith. I think in the Jerick McKinnon role, he could be super interesting. But Jacory Croskey-Merritt is one that keeps standing out to me because Washington was so efficient running the ball last year, fourth in the NFL in rushing yards. You talked about Jayden Daniels, the Jayden Daniels opening things up for a running back. And Washington was rumored to be involved with players like Travion Henderson in the pre-draft process. They don't draft a running back until the seventh round with Croskey-Merritt, but they've brought up that they really like his big playability. Dan Quinn is talking about his explosive, violent cuts and how he's just impressing everybody there. The beat reporters think that he could have a role, and I think it's just going to take a little bit less to happen for him to get that sort of opportunity than it would with Jarquez Hunter. Like Brian Robinson, I think is okay. I don't mind Brian Robinson, but it's sort of a much lower bar to cross. If Washington's really chasing for big explosive run plays, for me, it's Jacory Croskey-Merritt, but it's going to be a lot of these guys, Jared. And I do think it is wise for dynasty managers when you have the opportunity to add some of the players that are not established handcuffs, but have that potential. Get those guys on your roster. Like if Jonathan Taylor went down, just how good would DJ Giddens be?
Yeah, Giddens is interesting. There's been some buzz on him in the past week, like at least confirmation that he is the number 2 running back, which is nice to hear. Croskey-Merritt is someone I have been taking. He's like been my primary round 5 target in dynasty rookie drafts. I think he was obviously an interesting prospect. He only played 1 game last year, but what he did in 2023 was impressive. I think the fact that he got drafted was good considering what a strange profile he had. And then for all the reasons you mentioned, Theo, it's an offense we want to buy into. I think you said Brian Robinson is okay. I think that's the perfect way to describe Brian Robinson. He's like the classic Jag.
Replacement level running back.
Yeah, exactly. And then Austin Eckler's, well into his 30s. So the path for Croskey-Merritt to get on the field this season is not as hard as you might imagine.
So we talked a little bit in the pre-show. We're going to reveal some of Jared's flag plants and also a couple of bold predictions from each of us. Why don't we start out with it now? There's been some buzz with the New Orleans wide receivers, and I think it's being ignored by a lot of people in fantasy because of the question marks at the quarterback position. But we don't really have question marks when it comes to Kellen Moore producing wide receiver production in fantasy. No matter where he goes, wide receivers score points. And a lot of people say, Theo, that's really, really bold of you to say that Keenan Allen and A.J. Brown scored well for Kellen Moore, but he certainly didn't hold them back. And when it came to Keenan Allen, he took him to a really pretty high level a couple of years back, averaged over 20 points per game.
Yep.
What are your expectations with Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed? You've talked about this all offseason long, but are these two players that the Dynasty and redraft community are maybe sleeping on a little bit for this season?
Yeah, I think so. And for me, it starts with Kellen Moore, who if I was ranking the top 5 current play callers in terms of their impact on fantasy production, Kellen Moore would be inside my top 5. And part of it is the scheme. I think he does a good job. If you look at his history, he does a good job adjusting his scheme to the personnel, especially in terms of run pass rate. If he has a good passing offense, he'll lean into that. If he has a better running game, he'll lean into that. The other thing with Kellen Moore is the pace and play volume he's gotten out of his offenses. All 6 of his NFL offenses have been top 9 in plays per game. They've all run at least 65 plays per game. For perspective, the Saints were under 61 plays per game last year. So you could get a lot more play volume here. That obviously is good for all these guys. And then for me, with Olave and Shaheed, it comes down to, I think they're 2 really good players, and I think it's going to be a very concentrated offense, right? You have these 2 receivers, you have Alvin Kamara, you have Juwan Johnson, I think will be involved, but beyond those guys, there is nothing. They're relying on Brandon Cooks as their number 3 wide receiver, likely. So I think it's gonna be very concentrated. Again, I think Olave, I get the concussion concerns, but this is a former first-round pick, just turned 25 years old. He's been over a 23% target share in all 3 of his seasons. He's been over 2 yards per route run in all 3 of his NFL seasons. So he's already shown that he can command volume and be efficient on it. So I'm just kind of taking the, I think, quarterback related discount that we're getting on both Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because New Orleans, despite the concussion history, they exercised the 5th-year option. And then Kellen Moore came out and said all these great things about him. I do think Rashid Shaheed, it's interesting because he was so good last year to start the year, and he's just so cheap, whether it's a dynasty startup, whether it's best ball. Shaheed is definitely a much cheaper entry point than Olave. But even Olave right now in redraft, you're seeing 7th round Olave in formats like the FFPC. So I think he could really, really pay off there. You've always talked about the metrics with him. Every time he's on the field, he has a very good target share, very good air yard share. And now we have, like you said, a potential upgrade with offensive coordinator. So Olave is the interesting one for me. He could sort of rewrite the narrative this year after sort of disappointing people in ADP for consecutive seasons. Another player you're really flag planting is Jaylen Waddle. I love hearing this one. My Waddle bags are very much packed in Dynasty. On some teams, I've had Jaylen Waddle since Dynasty rookie drafts. Obviously started out his career with 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons and did it in multiple ways. Had the 100-catch, low ADOT season as a rookie, huge yards per reception numbers in year 2. Year 3, a little bit of mix of both. And then got that Nico Collins-like extension where Collins and Waddle both signed for basically identical contracts. The narrative on Collins and Waddle, it's not even close right now. Waddle is the cheapest he's been in Dynasty pretty much at any point in his career. Some really positive drumbeats out of Miami camp early on.
Yeah, and listen, last year was undoubtedly bad for Jaylen Waddle. The production was down, the volume was down, the efficiency was down. Part of it was the games too. Tagovailoa missed. Part of it was Miami's offense was just kind of a mess last year. I think a lot of it had to do with the offensive line, which admittedly is still a concern heading into this season. But I kind of trust Mike McDaniel to figure this thing out. If you just look at Waddle's career last year, clearly looks like an outlier. I mean, this guy had a strong college career at Alabama, was the 6th overall pick of the 2021 NFL draft. Like you said, Theo, 104 catches as a rookie. He finishes wide receiver 13 in PPR points per game in his 2nd season, wide receiver 22 in PPR points per game in his 3rd season. He's still just 26 years old. He's in his prime for a wide receiver. And I see multiple paths for him to rebound this season. I mean, the first one is Jonnu Smith's gone, right? I mean, Jonnu Smith's 19% of Miami's targets last season. I don't think Darren Waller's coming anywhere close to that. So there's going to be more targets to go around for these guys. And the second path for Waddle is what if Tyreek Hill actually is kind of done What if last year was just the beginning of the end for Tyreek Hill? That would give Waddle a path to emerge as the number one wide receiver in this passing game, which I think he's good enough to do. I think he could handle those duties. So I think Waddle's a guy who's like upside, gets into the top 15 wide receivers this season.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And then based on your Waddle take, is this a fade on Tyreek Hill? He's, again, Dynasty, it's a different conversation, but we're seeing Tyreek Hill sort of rising up in redraft, rising up in best ball. Waddle's still sort of staying put. He's a sixth rounder in a lot of formats. Hill, you're seeing touching the 2-3 turn in some really big money drafts. You bring up the Jonnu Smith not being there. Is this an offense that can just be so consolidated that it can be an Achane, Hill, Waddle led offense and all three of them hit? Or is it make a bet on one wide receiver and that's it?
I think all three can hit. I mean, we saw in, prior to last year under Mike McDaniel, you had Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle combining for like well over 50% of these teams' targets. That dropped to in the low 40s last year. So again, last year just looks like the outlier to me. I think Tyreek Hill, in redraft, I was taking a ton of him when he was going like middle to even back half of round 3 for much of this offseason. I think now that he's going 2-3 turn, I think he's like fairly priced. I think that kind of takes into account the ceiling and the floor on him. Because I think the ceiling, he could still give you like round 1 value this year. If he's 90% of the 2023 Tyreek Hill, and it was the wrist injury last year, it was the games 2 missed last year. Like I think Tyreek Hill could rebound and give you round 1 value. I also think he's into his 30s now. He's a speed receiver. Maybe there was something to his production decline last year, and maybe he does disappoint from his current spot. So he's kind of a guy, again, I think it's just kind of priced right at this point.
Yeah, and when we talk about Miami, I think people are so easy to forget that if we look at 2022 and 2023, they had so many huge spike weeks from multiple players. It was just an offense where everything was clicking. 2023, they were like top 3 in scoring as a team. And then last year, I feel like the market was really beating them up. Now you're starting to see certainly Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill creeping up a little bit in ADP, but Waddle could end up being a really, really valuable pick. I love that you're on Waddle here. A running back who's a little bit under the radar for many. I actually took him in the Pros versus Joes draft last night in FFPC, was Tyjae Spears. And it's interesting, Jared, because usually when you have a player score this much to end the season, people usually kind of have that player circled as, especially considering he was a year 2 player last year, 3rd round draft pick, did a lot as a rookie, caught like 50 passes as a rookie. And then last year, a little disappointing to start the year, but he certainly finished it strong. Now he's sort of just there. Like Tyjae Spears goes in a range where in redraft and best ball, you're using like a late 10th round pick, 11th round pick on him. Not a whole lot of buzz, but there seems to be vibes that it could be way more of a split backfield with Tyjae Spears taking on a larger role.
Yeah, Spears is one of my highest owned players in redraft right now at any position. He talked about his strong finish to last year. That speaks to the handcuff value, which I think is pretty obvious, right? Like if Tony Pollard goes down, Tyjae Spears, easy fantasy starter, probably some of them are ranking, I don't know, maybe just outside
running
the
back.
top 12,
Running back
maybe
15.
Inside.
Running back 15. That's about right.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's the obvious first part of his value. But I think, as you alluded to, Theo, with more of a split backfield, I think there could even be some standalone value here with Tyjae Spears. He was banged up all last season. He had an ankle injury in week 2, hamstring injury in week 6, concussion in week 11, another concussion in week 17. I just think he was never healthy last year. But you go back to his rookie season, he was much more efficient. 14th among 49 qualifying running backs in yards per carry, 11th in yards after contact per attempt, and 4th in missed tackles forced per attempt. Also a good pass catching back, 52 catches as a rookie. Even last year, despite all the injuries, he caught 30 balls. He was 13th among 40 running backs in yards per route last year. And again, with the split backfield thing, listen to anything the Titans coaching staff said last offseason. They kept calling these guys interchangeable. They were talking about wanting this to be a committee backfield. I think Tyjae Spears' injuries just prevented that from happening. I think that they just weren't able to deploy the backfield they wanted to. Tony Pollard, for his entire career, has been better on a smaller workload, right? Like 12 to 15 touches per game is kind of the sweet spot for Tony Pollard. So I think that's their plan this season. Tony Pollard probably still the 1A, but Tyjae Spears a close 1B where he's getting enough work to maybe be an RB3 flex option even when Pollard's healthy.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at Tennessee as a whole, they were limited in what they could do last year also because of the presence of guys like Will Levis. Like Mason Rudolph was like a upgrade from Will Levis when he came in and started some games to kind of put it in perspective. I think with Cam Ward, everything's going to be open to this coaching staff to be a little bit more Cincinnati-like. And I think that using these running backs as pass catchers out of the backfield is going to have to be a thing for them because of all the youth at the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 spot. Calvin Ridley should have a really, really strong role. Chikakonkwo sort of is what he is, but Elic Iamaner is and DK as well. Like you're talking about 2 rookie day 3 picks are going to be on the field potentially as the wide receiver 2 and wide receiver 3. Like we like Chim DK a little bit and we like Elic Iamaner a lot, but neither one of those guys can be expected to be massive target earners. So I think Tyjae Spears returning to his rookie year numbers, I think that's a really, really sharp take by you. Another quarterback you're in on this year is Trevor Lawrence. And I thought this was an interesting one. Lawrence, obviously a former number 1 overall pick, 5th year for Trevor Lawrence. Been a lot of disappointment for Trevor Lawrence dynasty managers based on the cost to get him. Sort of looked at as a Teflon prospect. Had that unbelievable year 2 where Jacksonville won the playoff game, and then it's been disappointment for the last 2 seasons. Is this a Liam Cohen rescues him? Is this a Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter together? The offensive ecosystem is it a combination of many things?
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, this one's easy to me. I'm surprised Trevor Lawrence is still, he's like quarterback 18 to quarterback 20 in ADP, depending on your site. To me, he's my favorite quarterback value on the board right now. And he has been underwhelming so far. Heading into his 5th year, he's still only 25 years old. He is, He's a week younger than Tyler Shuck, despite entering his 5th NFL season. So I don't think it's over for Lawrence by any means. I just look at what Liam Cohen did last year for Baker Mayfield, kind of a similar guy, right? An underwhelming career prior to last year. He hooks up with Liam Cohen, has a massive fantasy season, quarterback 3 in total fantasy points. So it's a huge coaching upgrade for Trevor Lawrence. It's Travis Hunter joining Brian Thomas to give the Jags what could be like the best wide receiver duo. I don't think it's a stretch to say it. In 6 months, we're saying Brian Thomas and Travis Hunter is the best wide receiver duo in the NFL. I think that's within the range of outcomes. And then Trevor Lawrence runs too. 18.1 rushing yards per game for his career. That's not insignificant for his fantasy value. So I see him as a guy who could easily finish as like a low end quarterback 1 this season, and you're getting him, basically as a low end quarterback 2 in these best ball drafts.
That was sort of going to be my follow up to you. Is last year we saw Baker Mayfield have his most successful season running, which is not really something anybody talks about. But when it comes to Trevor Lawrence, you've had 2 seasons where he was like around 350 rushing yards. What if he rushes for 500 yards this year? And that's the sort of wild card to this offense. We look at Liam Cohen as this really, really smart, really like analytical, sharp offensive coordinator. Maybe he unlocks a little bit more rushing production out of Lawrence this year, and opportunistic scrambling opportunities present themselves because his receivers are just so good. So yeah, there's a lot to like here, especially based on the cost. I think a lot of people in Dynasty kind of hate Trevor Lawrence. So I do think it's worth, and I don't, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. I think there's a lot of people who are just like, this guy was supposed to be this, and he's been anything but that. But again, only a 5th year player. And we look at the level, like Baker Mayfield under Dave Canales in that first year that he was in Tampa, took that big step forward. It was a even massive step forward with Liam Cohen last year, over 40 touchdown passes. So if Trevor Lawrence gives you 85% of the Baker Mayfield production from last year, then he's a huge, huge hit. Very, very interesting one. The last player you're flag planning is a sort of a litmus test. There's a lot of people, and certainly at fantasy points, Ryan Heath, I had him on Fantasy Football Daily just last week. He's all over Breece Hall. Scott Barrett's talked about Breece Hall. There's a lot of people sort of rooting on Breece Hall at his ADP and his dynasty price tag now. We talked about the potential for a Jahmyr Gibbs role. Then there's others who are saying, Jared, there's no contract. This coaching staff's going to use other running backs. Maybe it's time to move off of Breece Hall. I think he's a real big litmus test. You're leaning into him having a very strong season.
Yeah, and it's similar to the Waddle argument for me, where Yeah, there are concerns about what Hall did last year. A lot of his efficiency metrics were down from where they were his first 2 seasons. And yeah, there are definitely concerns with the environment, the brand new coaching staff, the presence of Braelon Allen, some of the, you know, Aaron Glenn's he's kind of gone both ways with this. He's talked about, wanting to have a committee, but he's also talked about, having Breece Hall be the focal point of this offense and him being a big part in the passing game as well. So we've kind of heard it both, kind of both directions from Aaron Glenn. But for me with Hall, I really just want to bet on the player. 36th overall pick of the 2022 draft. He just turned 24 years old. This guy finished RB7 in points per game as a rookie before tearing his ACL. Comes back from that knee injury, finishes RB5 in 2023. He's an electric runner. He's really good in the passing game. And even if Braelon Allen plays a decent sized role, the shift we're about to see from this Jets offense, the Jets last year with Aaron Rodgers, they were 4th in the NFL in pass rate. They were 1st in the NFL in red zone pass rate. They might finish 32nd in pass rate this year with Justin Fields. So I just think you're going to see this offense rely on the running game a lot more. And I think Breece Hall is going to be a focal point there. And I just want to bet on this player bouncing back.
Yeah, I see it. He's never rushed for 1,000 yards as a pro. If he's going to do it, it's probably going to be this year, despite my Braelon Allen enthusiasm. Like you said, a lot of RPOs, a lot of Justin Fields opening things up. And for Hall, you talk about the pass volume, but I think he's the best bet on New York to be the number 2 target earner. And I think that's not something we should brush aside. That's like looking at guys like Alvin Kamara as running backs who get up to that level of target share. Like Breece Hall could be 21% target share. I don't think that's like out of the realm of possibilities if Engstrand is really utilizing sort of what he has there. It's Allen Lazard, it's Josh Reynolds, as much Garrett Wilson as you can handle, and as much Mason Taylor as I think he can take on as a rookie. And then after that, I think it's Breece Hall is going to clean up a lot of design targets. So I'm sort of neutral on Hall, but I think you need to listen when there's a lot of sharp people like yourself sort of still pounding the table for Breece Hall, overcoming sort of the coach speak and just doing what he's done the last few years. Breece Hall's never averaged fewer than 15 points per game in any season as a pro. So we can't discount the former production.
Yeah, and I had been worried about the pass catching projection on Breece Hall just because I'm totally with you, Theo. Like he could finish second on this team in targets. I was worried though because we think of these mobile quarterbacks like Fields as guys who don't check down very often. Justin Fields last year was 2nd in the NFL in check down rate. In 2023, he was 6th in the NFL in check down rate. So despite being a mobile quarterback, he checks it down a lot, which is obviously good news for Breece Hall's target projection.
Also, a little bit of self-preservation for a guy like Justin Fields who got benched last year. If you're either having to force one downfield to Allen Lazard, having to force one into tight coverage to your 21-year-old tight end, or just dump it down to Breece Hall, you might dump it down to Breece Hall a few times. All right, Jared, we prefaced it before. You've got some bold predictions here. Why don't you start us out?
Yeah, and I'm not a bold prediction guy, by the way.
I had to twist Jared's arm to do this one. I love hot takes and bold predictions. I love them. And every single show, anybody listen to this, anybody listen to School of Scott, anybody listen to Fantasy Football Daily, all of my guests are going to drop at least one bold prediction, even begrudgingly. But your bold predictions are absolute fire here, Jared. Be proud of your bold predictions here.
Yeah, and my first one sounds bold, but it might not be that bold. Might not even be that bold. So my first one was Devon Achane catches 100+ passes this season, which I think the last running back to do that was Austin Eckler like 2 or 3 years ago. But if you just look at Achane's averages in his 11 games with Tua last year, 6.6 targets per game on a 17.7% target share, 6.1 catches per game. You extrapolate that over a full season, 113 targets and 104 catches. So Achane just needs to stay on the pace he was on with Tua last year, and he's at 100 catches, and that was with Jonnu Smith in the picture, and he obviously is gone now.
I love it, and it's just another natural like another step forward. The progression of Devon Achane. Last year, he didn't even lead all running backs in targets. He was 2nd in targets and was just so efficient as a pass catcher. And again, like you brought up the 6 catches a game with Tua Tagovailoa, and Jonnu Smith gone. Like you talk about how it's a big benefit for Jaylen Waddle, but it's probably even more of a benefit for Devon Achane. So I love it. And then to talk about the players who have done it, Christian McCaffrey, 116 receptions. Austin Eckler, you talked about 2022 at 107. McCaffrey again, and then Matt Forte, Larry Centers, LaDainian Tomlinson, and then according to Jared Smola, it's going to be Devon Achane, making it 7 seasons where an NFL running back has had 100 catches. I love it. I'll keep mine going here, and mine is Emeka Egbuka. I've talked about this one where I think there's a non-zero chance Emeka Egbuka leads Tampa Bay in wide receiver scoring this year. I understand that's a huge, almost sacrilege to say that Mike Evans doesn't lead them in fantasy points. Obviously, if Chris Godwin's healthy, he's going to score some fantasy points. But the vibes are there with Emeka Egbuka, and every single day it's a different source. It's Todd Bowles, it's Josh Grizzard, it's Baker Mayfield, it's Mike Evans himself, talking about the versatility of Emeka Egbuka, the athleticism of Emeka Egbuka. Baker Mayfield saying that he is built like a running back and he catches passes like Chris Godwin. Like, I think when this sort of buzz is there with a player drafted in his range, talk about Brian Thomas last year. Brian Thomas last year was sort of this slow drip guy that ended up being like an 8th round pick, 9th round pick. I don't think Emeka Egbuka is going to score at that level, but I do think Emeka Egbuka is going to be good enough this year that by midseason, he's looked at as a top 15 dynasty wide receiver. And the price you paid in rookie drafts and the price you paid in dynasty startups is going to be looked at as a huge value. Your quick thoughts on Emeka Egbuka this season and beyond, Jared?
Yeah, I love it. One of my favorite stats I found on Egbuka this offseason is he was obviously primarily a slot receiver at Ohio State, but he actually averaged more yards per route from the outside than he did in the slot. 2.97 yards per route run from the outside versus 2.48 from the slot. Both strong marks, but the fact that versatility, which one speaks to his ability to contribute, right away at either spot for the Bucs in the slot or outside, but it just speaks to the football IQ, which is what we've heard the Bucs coaches and Baker Mayfield talk up since he was drafted. So I think he is as pro ready a rookie wide receiver as we've seen in a while.
So keep your last bold prediction till the last one, because it's really, really a good one. I'll do my next one, and mine's, I guess, not as spicy, but I think that it's 2 players that we're making big bets on in Dynasty, in redraft, and in best ball, and they are going to pay off huge. Bijan Robinson finishes as the RB1 overall. Drake London finishes as a top 5 wide receiver scorer. Dark horse to finish as the wide receiver 1 overall. And I think that this is going to drag Michael Penix up with them. I think Penix is going to be a streamable quarterback in redraft, a huge hit in best ball, and a guy who gains dynasty value this year. I even think Kyle Pitts is going to be a little bit more consistent and have borderline tight end 1 numbers this year. Call him the tight end 15. I don't want to go over the top with that one, but I think that this is going to lead to Zach Robinson becoming sort of the next in vogue offensive coordinator that is on a fast track to get hired. I think teams will be lining up to hire Zach Robinson next season. He's going to have a Liam Cohen-esque year. Atlanta's scoring numbers are going to go way, way up, and you're going to be really happy you have those 2 skill position players and Michael Penix. Not that bold, but I think a pretty strong take there. Your thoughts on Bijan, Drake London at cost?
Yeah, I'm with you on everything besides Kyle Pitts.
Fine.
I guess
went too bold.
I can't get there with him. But Bijan is my RB1. I can definitely see it with Drake London, just the target earning he showed so far. Penix could definitely prove to be an upgrade at quarterback. And I've gotten higher on Penix really over the last month now, just kind of thinking more and digging into this Falcons offense more. The thing I like about Atlanta is the continuity they have. I mean, they're returning 4 or 5 offensive linemen from an O-line that was very good last year. They're obviously returning the same coaching staff. They're returning almost all of their skill position players from last year. So it's a good spot for Penix. He also gets all those, games indoors, which we always like. And the one thing I'm wondering about Penix is, could we get some rushing production from him? He didn't do it in college. He didn't do it last year, but he had a nice 40 time leading up to his draft. And the coaching staff has made some comments this year. They haven't come out and said, like, we want to use Michael Penix's legs more, but they've just made comments about how athletic he is and just that it could be a facet of his game that they're looking to tap into a bit more. So I just wonder if we get not big rushing numbers out of Penix, but enough to, make a difference in fantasy.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's sort of the unknown upside with him. Brett Whitefield made the same argument where he's athletic. He's just athletic and he's smart and he's on an offense where he's going to have those opportunities. I'll throw one more part of the argument. You talked about Devon Achane being a 100 reception player. I think Bijan Robinson, the natural progression for him is to be an 80 reception player this year. Had 60 plus last year, high 50s as a rookie. And when you look at like the all-time reception totals for running backs in their first 2 seasons as a pro, he's next to some really, really big names. Talked about Matt Forte, talk about Le'Veon Bell, those kind of players. They all took big steps forward. And I think when it comes to Bijan, like, there's not enough discussion that he could take a big step forward as a pass catcher. Where are you projecting him to finish? Is he at least 70 plus in the Draft Sharks projections?
Bijan Robinson. So again, he is our RB1. He's my number 2 overall player.
Mine as well. Mine as well.
Bijan,
Chase Bijan. That's
for
it.
Me. Yep. So we have Bijan for only 60 catches. Our projections tend to be on the cautious side with a lot of these guys, but I think 70, 80 is definitely within his range of outcomes.
Yeah, I'm gonna get in Matt Schoaf's DMs and encourage him to increase those. Give us your final bold prediction. This might get some people angry, but I love it. I've been talking about this player. 2 main events. I've drafted this player twice. 2 big dynasty startups. I drafted this player twice. I'm sort of all in on this player, but I love the spiciness of your take. Let everybody know you're going to make one group of dynasty managers super happy and one group very, very angry at you, Jared.
Yeah, this one's more bold than the Achane one, but I'm going to say Jameson Williams outscores Amon-Ra St. Brown this year. And really, like, if you want to put some numbers to it, just look at their PPR points per target last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 2.23. Jameson Williams, 2.33. So he was more efficient on a per target basis. We just need those targets to tighten up a little bit. I don't even think Jameson Williams needs to out target Amon-Ra St. Brown, but if he can get within like 20, his big playability, I think, gives him the chance to, be the Lions' top fantasy scorer this year.
I love it. You heard it here first from Jared Smola. We're all in on Jameson Williams. Jared, even more all in on Jameson Williams. Look out for Jared's big articles this month over at Draft Sharks. Check out all of the media Draft Sharks is putting out. Jared's one of the sharpest guys around, and we'd love to have you back on a pod sometime later this year, Jared. Stick with us here at Dynasty Life when we drop in shows like this every single week up into the season, and then once a week in season as well. Check out School of Scott. Sigmund Bloom joined us this week, and Jim Coventry of RotoWire is joining me on Fantasy Football Daily this week as well. And I'm going to be reviewing my FFPC Pros versus Joe's draft. We'll see you soon.